Before we start, I'll just make a quick survey. So who here is a web developer? Okay, some of you, great. And who of you is a mobile developer? Cool, cool. So Android developers? Android, okay. And iOS developers? Okay, so now we see who's running away from the platform. Okay, so getting from the topic of being a mobile deserter, probably these are the companies that you may know: Instagram, Airbnb, Uber, or Facebook even. And these have something in common. You have probably heard about them. These are all mentioned on the React Native webpage. And this is something that when you go there and you see all those names, you really feel that the technology will be something really amazing for you. But the thing that probably many of us wonder is whether the technology is actually for me. If I, as a single developer, can actually benefit from this, or do I need bigger resources to actually work with this? Or maybe should we go with my company and start creating a project in this? So let's start from the base. My name is Eliasz Sawicki, and I am software developer. I come from Gdańsk, where I work at Bright Inventions. So I do iOS apps there, but also I do React and React Native. So that's why today I decided to take this topic. I blog about things that I do also on my blog, that is under eliaszsawicki.com, and also the slides from this presentation will be available there, so you do not need to take photos of them. So today I wanted to start with React Native, and I really won't go deep into internals of how React Native works. What I want to do is I want to answer a question that I had before: whether React Native is actually technology for me, and what problems can occur during my path as React Native developer. So on my example, I started as iOS developer, starting with Objective-C. Then slowly, when Swift 2.0 came, I started writing it in Swift. And actually, it was pretty cool. The language is, well, modern, like Kotlin. And there are many things that you are really happy about when you develop with this. But after some time, I've got a proposition of writing a web page, and it was actually my first time, so I decided, like, why not? Let's see how things can get crazy there. And I started writing React, and there are many web frameworks that you may start working with when you go into this topic, and it's pretty hard to choose. But we decided to go with React because of the fact that, well, big companies support this, and it's developed in a pretty good way. Just to have a quick look on how React looks, more or less. So again, I won't go into deeper. What I wanted you to know is that normally when you build your apps from components and you build it to create more sophisticated designs, and the thing that would be probably important for you is the function render, which basically will tell you how your view will look like. And you can render normal things in HTML tags. I will get to that in a second. And you can render the state of your components. And if the state changes, then it means that the component will be re-rendered in a smart way. And the tags that I've been talking about are not actual HTML tags. These are actually transpiled to function in the later time. So actually, you're building UIs composed of functions. So after getting into React, I started to have some feelings. I'm really keen on mobile development, especially in Swift, because, well, the language provides you with many abilities. You can do really crazy stuff there. But I started noticing that there are many things in web development that I really liked. For example, the quick feedback loop. And this is something that I really miss in mobile development. You can go and fix it at some points, but you often end up with tests being not run as fast as you want it to. You end up with waiting for a simulator to turn on and to show you what's happening actually from your code. And also you had the ability to hot reload the code. And what does it mean? Basically, when you create a mobile app, what you do is you recompile your project, and then you see what the code that you've written looks like on the screen, or maybe you create a zip files that will show you that. So when I came home to my mother iOS development, I started to feel that I was actually missing something. And the thing that I was missing was not actually React. I mean, React was cool, but the thing that I was missing was actually the quick feedback loop and the fact that I was working in much more productive way. So when I heard about React Native, I really started feeling that this could be a way for me to go there and to do some fancy stuff and create mobile apps that will be cross-platform and will work much better. So when you take React, you basically will work with JavaScript at first. You can go with a bit further with that, but we'll get to this. So if you're working with JavaScript, many people fear that it will be rendered as a web view in your application, and it's actually not. What happens is you use, for example, on iOS, a JavaScript core to work with this, and then it's actually rendered normally and natively in your app. And it's done because of the fact that with React Native, there are many libraries that come to you, and you can use them to actually bridge the code that you've written to actual native components. And also, there are many scripts that come with React Native. The scripts that allow you to actually build the project, to set up whole configuration. And when you start working with that, the first thing is actually the declarative components that come from React. So basically, there is the same approach. If you take a look at React Native component, for example, it looks the same. The only difference is actually that there are no the HTML kind of tags. Only you define your own, or you use the ones that library provides to you. For example, text, button, view. And it looks pretty easygoing at first because, well, we have a few texts presented and a button. And what actually is going on when you're working with this JavaScript code is that you somehow have to provide it to your app. And there are two ways of doing it. Basically, the first way is when you, for example, go to App Store and upload your app there. Then the JS bundle will be provided inside your app. But you can also do tricks, like, for example, set up your own server and then provide this JS bundle on the run. And it means that basically you do not have to compile your app anymore if you want to see the results, because you can just send a new file, the new JS bundle there. And in the end, you are actually able to create cross-platform solutions, both on iOS and on Android. But this also has a lot of responsibilities that you should know about. But many people are also afraid, what happens if I do not manage to do certain thing in JavaScript? And the base solution is that you can actually breach your normal native code that you write in Swift, in Kotlin, Java, Objective-C, and you can actually expose those APIs to React Native, to JavaScript runtime. So what I noticed actually is the whole ecosystem, the React and React Native, were pretty much the same. As a person who first learned React, that really required me to acquire some new skills, I was able to really fast get into React Native and understand the topic. And there is a good thing about this, because you actually learn it once and you can write it basically everywhere. By everywhere, I mean web and mobile, but it's still like a lot. And what I noticed also is that you acquire some general skills. And I'm not talking about that you should not specialize in certain things, because there are like different opinions about this, but there is a good thing when you can actually write a mobile app, and then suddenly if you need a person in your web project to just fix something or add a small feature, you can actually go there as well. And what's easy to go from there is maybe you can then acquire some skills of Node.js and fix some bugs in your code of the backend, and that means that your team gets a bit more flexibility. So it's much easier if someone is going on holidays, or basically they need more help on one side. So, well, I want to start coding. Like, let's see what React Native can do. But there is a whole bunch of things that you have to go through before you actually start coding. And the first approach that you need to learn when talking about React Native is that you have to bring your own tools. But what does it happen? Well, you are probably used to your IDE like Android Studio or Xcode or Appcode or some JetBrains solutions. And when you start working with React Native, there's no actually like a one proper way to do it. And what you will find is that actually you either take some JetBrains solution like WebStorm, which is fine, but also there are like much more people who are actually using text editors with plugins. And what plugins mean? I mean, currently, if you want to format a code, you basically press a code combination. Now you will have to go to your text editor, download the plugin that will format the code for you, and now you can use it. If you use, for example, TypeScript and you want to transpile it to JavaScript, you still have to bring your own transpiler and do it on your side. So you sometimes you will start missing things like Xcode, where for example you can just press run and everything happens for you. Even when you're running unit tests, you have to bring your own test runner. And at first, it may seem a bit daunting because, well, you have to do all those things. But after some time, you notice that maybe all of those things that were previously in the IDE, you actually did not use all of them. And the whole environment that you work with is a bit lighter. And the same reflects to starting a project. If you're starting an Xcode project, you probably go, create a new project, and you set the things that you want. Here, it's not that easy. There are many dependencies, but there are also great people who create tools, and you may feel lost with that. But there are also people who create great tools, like Create React Native App, which allows you to actually avoid the initial setup of your project and jump directly into coding. And maybe after some time, when you feel much more comfortable in the whole environment, you'll be able to actually configure the needed parts yourself. And there is also a question, what language do I use? I mean, the JavaScript is pretty obvious, but currently it's getting into better and better states. There are many great features like async awaits that allow you to avoid the whole callback hell that you previously may noticed. But many people say that actually JavaScript is not a solution for them. Maybe they are used to languages like Swift, Kotlin, or others that are strongly typed, and you can actually do things that scale much better in the long run. And that's why there is a thing called TypeScript. And TypeScript will be a great solution, in my opinion, when you go from the world of Swift and you start missing the whole typing thing. So that's why you can use TypeScript. This is a superset of JavaScript that allows you to add types to your code, that will allow you to even like have a better code completion, like a code completion, which is pretty great. But those were the things that you were actually used to as native mobile developers. So at first, it will be pretty confusing. And also the architectural choices. I mean, if you're doing mobile development, you are probably used to things like MVVM, MVC, MVP, and other fancy stuff. And this is actually good. I mean, when using React, React actually does not force any architecture on you, and the same applies to React Native. So when you are working with this, you may at times start looking at architectures that people use in web, for example, Flux implementations like Redux. And Redux is pretty good solution that will work fine in many cases, but you have to also be aware of the fact that when you come to the environment of development in React Native, you will see Redux and these fancy architecture names many times. And you may start feeling that, well, I have to use this because there is no other way to do this. And the answer is that you do not have to do that, and maybe the Redux won't be a good solution for you. So at first, you may start with basic approach, because if you start adding all those tools at once, you will notice that there is too much work, basically, while going to React Native. So can I code now if I have the whole environment? And actually, I wanted to show you a small demo of how a workflow in React Native may look like. So let me allow me to change the screen. OK. Is everything visible? The code is in the back? OK, cool. So let me start with showing you what the app actually does. This is really fancy calculator with great design. I mean, I'm into industrial design, so that's why it's so simple. And what it basically does, it adds two values. So if I click calculate, there's probably a message that tells me that I should pass proper values. If I add 1 and 2, what should happen? Any ideas? Like, it will actually show 12. Makes sense. Can you see it? Probably not, so let me fix it. So this is, this was the moment that everyone should go like, oh. And this is the first thing that I wanted to show you. This is the hot reloading that you'll like a lot when coming from mobile development. Because now if you want to change anything, like not everything, because there are places where you have to basically reload the app, but still you don't have to recompile it. But for example, if I want to play with my design, I can go to text input and decide that now it will be a bit wider, a bit bigger, and maybe it will have some other background. Oh, this is a screen that you will see often. The red is for love, so don't be afraid of this. So if you change those values, they are instantly presented to you. So you can play with the whole border radius, with designs, and you can even start adding components or removing them in order to see what happens. And it greatly improves the way that you will work with your code. But it's not the end. Let's see. We noticed that it was not working too well. I mean, 1 plus 3 is maybe 13 in some cases. But if you want to change it to a normal value, let's go to add values.js, which is, and let's change it to another thing. So now I changed the implementation to actually add normal integers, and it works instantly. I do not have to reload the code anymore because it's provided by my packager to the app on the run. What you also may notice is that actually my test broke because, well, the implementation was a bit different. So I'll go to my file and do what you should probably do is fix some tests. Let's change it to 3, makes sense. So once again, the time that I save my file, I have the result of the test. And it may look like currently it's taking 1 millisecond because probably it's not such complicated algorithm that I implemented. But in the long run, when you have, for example, 200 tests, it goes within 1 to 2 seconds. And so you instantly know if you broke something in your app. If you're fiddling just with the code that you've written, and normally in mobile development, you will go to the test target and run it after some time maybe, or maybe you run it every time. Here, you basically write code, save the file, and you know the result. But there is also another great feature, which I really love. So this one is called Storybooks. And in order to do this, I have to turn off my, I have to turn down my old packager and start yarn Storybook and start Storybook packager. So currently, a source code that will go to my app will not be the same that I provided previously. So let me reload it. And it says that please open the web page and select the story. So once again, while you work with text editors that are really nicely and easily, maybe not easily, but you can actually write plugins to them, there is a great plugin that supports Storybook. I basically click connect to Storybook, and now I have ability to work with this. And what are storybooks? So you probably noticed that things that you implement in your apps are usually screens that may have different states. For example, your screen may present an error when it failed to download the data. It may present the list with data with downloaded things. And in order to check if everything is working, at some points you start just going through all those scenarios to see if the views are actually working properly. And when you use Storybooks, you can actually go through all solutions and check if everything is working fine with given input. So this is an example of a story. So I say that this will be a stories of calculator components, sorry. And the first one will be with result, where I basically state what is the input of my component. Then I say that, okay, this will be without a result, and the other one will be with error message. And this way I can basically go through all scenarios and see if my app behaves well. If not, then I can basically go to my file and start fixing it. And it will work instantly as well. So, not this, sorry, a puppy. Okay. Okay, so this was the workflow that you are actually able to achieve while working with this. And the things I mentioned about were the hot reloading that you've seen first. And hot reloading is when you actually do not have to recompile your app and it instantly gives you feedback. Even more, it will maintain the state that you previously achieved, and you will not have to click through all the screens, and you'll be able to instantly check if everything's working. Testing code is actually also working instantly, as I showed you. It's every time you save a file, you get immediate result whether you broke something or not. And this is great because at some points, if you're not checking it every time you change something, then you may find that your tests fail, and now you have to look for a thing that broke them. And here you will instantly know it. So that's why you can use test runners for your tests like Mocha, like Jasmine, or Jest, which is provided by Facebook. And the other thing comes also to UI testing, because actually UI testing is a pretty difficult topic, in my opinion, for mobile applications. Because if you want to do some to check those things, you can either go with some Calabash that sees if everything is working fine and goes through the app, or you can go with snapshot tests. And normally when you're talking about snapshot tests, you will go through the app as well, create the photo of each screen, and then compare it with a new screen that was created after your changes. So it means that you will hold the reference screenshot in your repository probably to check if everything is working fine. In React, it may work a bit different, because actually you do not have to save the whole photos. You can basically check the output of the render function and see if it's different to what it was before. And the great feature of Storybooks. Storybooks are really great regarding working with UI, because it allows you to basically go into the component that you want to implement and check and start doing workflow like you maybe used to do while TDDing unit tests. And this allows you also to achieve a really good work division, because at one point you're not working with everything at once. You basically work with logic code. You see if tests fail. If they fail, you fix them, and this is your work. Then you switch to Storybooks. You start implementing the screens that will now support the states that you want them to. And after all, you start basically merging those two words, and actually hot reloading will help you in order to achieve a good results in the app. And it looks really fun. And this is something that shows you that React Native is a great tool, but well, you have to be aware of many things. It's not like React Native solves your all problems. And when you see demo like this somewhere in the web, you may feel that, wow, there's nothing wrong with the tool. It will work perfectly. There's nothing more than to jump directly into the code and start working with this. So the first thing that you have to remember about is that you have to adapt the do-it-yourself approach when you come to this environment. And why is that? So normally when you use the code, when you write the code on native platforms, there are many solutions that are already done. You basically download libraries, you create some view code by yourself. It's working or it's not, but basically the only dependencies that you have are the ones, for example, in your pod file, and there are like 10 of them. And here, while you develop app with React Native, you will find many components that are not done yet, or many components that do not work the way you want them to. So every time you have something like this, you probably need to download the code base of the library. You have to fix it yourself. You have to add a pull request. So you will the benefit of this is that you will suddenly start contributing much more to open source, which is probably cool. And React Native itself is also a dependency, and it's still in the development. So you will find places that may not work as you expect, and well, you can go into it internals and fix it yourself. Like, that's a big plus. But if you do not want to adapt the do-it-yourself approach, then you may end up stuck in some place and you wouldn't know what to do next because you cannot push your app forward. So this is something that you have to be aware of before you jump into it. And the whole thing is still evolving. I mean, every time, every like 2 weeks, I guess, there is an update for React Native. Things are changing. But there are also many things that, as I said, are not done yet. And for example, when I started configuring my project in React Native, I suddenly decided to do this crazy thing, like changing configuration name for my project. And it was something that I thought that it should work seamlessly. And suddenly when I changed it, I noticed that my project did not work anymore. And I really didn't know what happened there, so I had to jump into the internals of React Native and find the solution for this. Well, I can also go to community and ask a question on GitHub to see whether it works or not. But well, this was additionally the job for me. And what I ended up finding is that suddenly in the code of React Native, I noticed this nice if that checked if the configuration is actually debug. And well, I didn't expect that, but it looks like there may be more places like this. And well, the solution is you can fix it and you can create a pull request for this, but you have to be aware that it's not entirely done yet. It's still in beta. And you develop for different platforms. And this is something that you probably have seen before. When I showed you the demo, I actually showed it on iOS simulator. And this is pretty normal. I found out that many of team members started testing the code on the devices that they previously used. So when I was working on iOS, I suddenly noticed that the part in Android was not working the same way. And the same thing was about Android developers. So you have to remember that from now you have responsibility of providing the good experience on both platforms. And things may look differently. This is once again my industrial design. So not mentioning the native components like text fields because they look differently, but it's maybe fine. The buttons also look different, but you can always easily create a new button, which is not a problem at all. But the thing I wanted to show you, for example, here, you may see that the same thing rendered a bit differently. It's because of how Android and iOS solves this kind of conflicts while going out of your parents' area. And things like that happen in more places. Sometimes scroll view will work slightly different, or you will see that the for example, slider for date does not exist on Android in the same way. So you have to implement your own solutions for that. And you will have a lot of dependencies. I mean, this is something completely new, and you may get really scared when you get into React Native project, and you notice that from the very beginning, there is a ton of dependencies. And you have to really adapt the way of working with log files and start saving information of what dependencies exist in your project. Like, you had to do it before, but now if you create a mistake here, this could be a bit painful, and from my experience, it always happens on Fridays when you have to give something to client, for example. So yeah, you have to be sure that you know what you're doing. And you have to remember that there are already many solutions for native problems. Like if you have problems with payments, there is probably a solution for that. So there was not a point to maybe write the same in JavaScript. So basically what you do is you take the dependency from the native code and you create a bridge. And this way, everything works fine. But you have to remember that now you have two places that have to change in order to adapt the changes from the native library. And once again, you may do it yourself, or you may create a pull request to library, but you have to remember about this. And also another thing is that actually we found that there are many React Native libraries that are not supported anymore, and suddenly you send a pull request and you expect it to be merged, and you notice that, well, nobody merges it. So we start forking those repositories, and yeah, this may seem that maybe this is not a good solution, but in the long run, it won't be a problem. But you have to be aware that such things will happen for you as mobile developers or as for people who basically want to create apps in this. Another thing is debugging. So debugging is a thing that you do daily, for sure. And when you are used to IDE that supports that well, you may find yourself lost when you go to normal text editor, because by default, it won't work instantly for you. You have to configure it manually so that you can debug your code in the text editor. In the end, I found myself working with Chrome developer tools and debugging it in web often, because sometimes I had problems with debugging in text editor. But it's not that bad. I mean, there are many things that will work really well for you. But with configuring your debugger in your text editor, you have to be also aware that at the time, for example, that you want to use TypeScript in the code, you have another thing that you have to remember about, because suddenly, when you add a breakpoint, it will not map directly to what JavaScript code look like, because you'll have to create additional map on how it will look at your TypeScript code. But in the end, TypeScript code transpiles to JavaScript and looks like almost the same. So even if you have to debug the JavaScript code, it's not like you would be debugging assembler. So don't worry about this. And navigation. I mean, I didn't expect that to be a problem. I mean, when you come from mobile world, you have those navigation controllers in iOS, for example, where you simply push things, pop things, dismiss, everything works. And suddenly you go to React Native and you notice that there are many dependencies for navigation, and there is not a standard solution for that. So you start looking for this, and it looks like one solution works well, but doesn't have a certain feature that you need. So you go to the other one, and it may end up being really tricky. So we ended up currently using React Native navigation from Wix, and this looks pretty solid for us. It's basically native navigation bridge that exposes APIs to JavaScript, but also it gives you the feeling of going really the pure native feeling. What is also important, this is not perfect library as well, and it's great that many people work on this, and that's why we also use it. But you may end up with places, for example, that if we wanted to select a center position in a tab bar, we notice that there is no API for that in the library. And again, we have to implement it ourselves, send a pull request. Luckily, guys from this library merged it really fast, so everything worked well. So it may seem like many things are actually not going that well in React Native, and in the end you may think that, well, maybe it is not a solution for me. If it has got so many things that do not work instantly, I have to work on all those things. But there are also good things, like, for example, sharing code. And when I got into the topic, I thought that it will not work like this, because many people tell you that 80% of their code base is shared. I really couldn't believe that. You have your views, you have your code that is directly bound to the native APIs. But actually, I wouldn't lie if I tell you that our code base, we were able to actually share 80% to 90% of the code. And it matters, it really matters on what kind of things that you use, because if you start writing native code and bridge it yourself, then yes, you will not share this code in common, but things like models, like business logic, networking code, even views work really well with React Native. And views work well because of the fact that the abstraction that is actually built on top of this is, has a good solution for that. And at the time that I showed you the slide with UIs looking a bit different, if you come closer to that, you can most often find a solution that works well and that fits for both platforms. There's also an active community that will, if you come with a good approach, not demanding approach that you write an issue that this library is not working, fix it for me, it won't work. You have to show that you want to help as well, and you may feel like a part of something bigger, and you may work with people that are really enthusiastic about what they do, and this gives you a sense that you're actually in a good place. And the tooling, things like hot reloading, storybooks, they work great. I mean, the experience that you get is something that's I personally, it's really hard for me to achieve this while doing simple mobile development natively. And in the end, you feel really productive because at the time that you actually learn React Native, you start producing those screens, implementing logic, and it works really fast. I mean, you start writing less code, so it means there are less bugs, and if you want to fix it, you fix it in one place. So it is a good solution for you. So now the time comes to ask a question whether React Native is actually a solution for my team. And can we get to it, and should we? So the first thing is when you get to React Native, you'll probably not find many React Native developers out there to just grab them from the street and make them work with you. So probably you will end up learning it by yourself. And this is a common thing because companies suddenly take web developers who need to learn React Native, or they take native developers who somehow pass their experience to this platform. And in my opinion, the best way is to have both web developers and React Native and native developers working on this. But if I had to specify on a single one, I would choose taking native developer to React Native. And this is because the fact that, well, you will still have to learn the whole tooling using text editors with plugins, the new language, new APIs and tools. But in the end, you have a knowledge of how APIs work on mobile, how mobile behaves, and what are the boundaries that you should not get close to. And you can also start using it with native tools. So many of you probably use things like Fastlane or some Gradle plugins to upload your APK files to Google Play. And in the end, you can use them as well in your app because what's the output of the whole passion, whole work that you put into the project are actually the same files that you will receive from normal workflow. And there's also the other thing, you have to, if you're just starting with the project, I would not recommend to use this solution for a project that you have to be that you have to have a pixel perfect solution, because there is a learning curve. There will be places in which you should probably go and find other solution for the problem. It's the same way for pure native development, because suddenly if you find a UI component that takes a week to develop, you probably want to change it for a simpler solution that you will implement just in one day. So the same goes to React Native. You have to be aware that there will be places where using other solution will be better. But in the end, you're not tied to this solution. I mean, you don't have to start a greenfield project to add React Native. You may take your app and add it to just one place and see how it works for you. If it works fine, then maybe that's the time to start developing next features using React Native. If it does not work for you, maybe there is a point to still wait and see how the whole thing develops and evolves during next year. So this was React Native, and actually, there are stories where people look for silver bullets, and these are for killing witches, werewolves, and vampires. And normally, I should say now that React Native is not a silver bullet, but it's a really strong tool. I mean, you don't have to have a silver bullets to solve your problems. And having all those solutions, you really may work well with what you got. And in the end, I think that you cannot forget about one thing, about the developer experience that you get from developing your apps. Because, well, coding is fun and creating mobile app is fun, but suddenly I noticed that when working with these tools, I feel that the whole environment really supports me in the way that I want to write my apps. They support me in the way that I write my tests. They support me in the way that I want to write my UI components. So this was React Native, and if you have any question, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you. Okay.
How does the structure project look like? I mean, everything in a single repository, or you have iOS and Android repository, and you also have a shared library. And
okay.
Do you have any recommendation?
Yeah, so for a normal project, that probably is not too big, because if it grows, you probably want to start moving things. But for a normal project, your whole code will be in one repository, and because of the fact that the code is shared, you don't really have a reason to separate it for the separate platforms. So you may start, for example, separating the native solutions that you built, and maybe provided them as separate frameworks so that other people can use them too. But yeah, everything will be in one place.
Cool, thank you.
Are you able to connect React Native with the code written in C, or how can you do it? You can do it directly, or you should use a platform-specific solution?
Okay, so the question is whether how you connect with C and languages like that. Okay, so I have not done it, but the way that I would do it is normally, for example, for iOS, you can bridge C to and use it from Objective-C normally. So, so what I can imagine is that you will bridge this the same way that you do with your native code. So you will use the C APIs, for example, from the native, and you will use them bridged on React Native. But maybe there is a solution to do that without having the third place.
You mentioned that you use Chrome developer tools to debug your applications.
Yeah, often.
But since React Native uses the platform-specific components, how does it work? Does it create HTML output when you run it on browser, or?
Okay, so how you debug the actual codes in the Chrome developer tools. So normally, the first thing is to say is you do not debug native code this way. What you will debug is actually the JavaScript code or TypeScript code that you write in your text editor. If you use TypeScript, there is a way to configure it so it works with text editor debugger. But for example, to do it like a quick way, you will end up with having JavaScript in your Chrome developer tools, and you end up writing TypeScript. So there is still a solution for that. I mean, it's not... if you just take TypeScript and transpile it to JavaScript, it will look almost the same. So it's really easy to debug it this way. And you will see the same code that you write. So yeah, you will see those JSX, I mean those HTML tags. And
so basically, how much native components do you have to write compared to the regular ones? Or basically, how much working hours would you say you need for React specific code compared to the native one?
Okay, so it really depends on the app that you work with. For example, many places, like when you start working with video players or things like that, you may think that it will be only native work. But for example, there are many solutions that already exist. So you may use already bridged libraries, and then you will not have to even touch the native code. But in the end, there will be places where you have to go and do it yourself. We ended up actually in a normal app. There were just a few modules, so it would be like 90% of the codes we would write in React Native, like even more. There are like, it really depends on the problems that you need to solve. For example, like animations, these I would consider a bit harder than do it natively. So maybe then you would like to implement it this way. And
so were the working hours are also in similar proportion? Where did you have to like put 9 working hours for the React solution and 1 to native one? Or? did the proportion differ?
Oh, distributing the hours. I mean, it's really hard to say how we distributed the hours because, well, it was one project. I'm not sure if I understand the question.
I'm just curious about how many native developers would I need in a React Native project, basically.
Okay, yeah, so normally we did not split the job in a way that, okay, this is native part, so you have to do it natively, and this is JavaScript, so don't touch it. It's like we were developing both solutions. So yeah, that was the point.
Okay, I have an extension of the previous question. It's possible for the compiler to inline the source maps in the JavaScript, so we could see the original code in DevTools?
I've seen that it is possible. However, I did not configure it this way. It also really depends when you're getting into the topic of React Native. There are many things that are surely doable, and you can do them. But the point is that sometimes the time schedule cannot be as flexible, so you cannot spend basically any amount of work on this. But yeah, it is doable to see a TypeScript code in the web developer tools. From what I've seen, it's yeah.
So thank you, Eliasz, for the presentation.
Thank you.